Here is $500. Go get a manicure and stay away from my wedding. That was the note my sister Keisha attached to a personal check, terrified I would embarrass her in front of her new senator-in-laws. She thought I was still the broke sister driving a beat-up Toyota. She had no idea that the very ground she was standing on, the Emerald Estate Resort, belonged to me. Before I tell you how I turned her dream wedding into a nightmare, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who should love you most. The engine of my 2010 Toyota Corolla sputtered and wheezed as I inched forward in the line of gleaming vehicles. To my left was a silver Bentley. To my right, a blacked-out Escalade that probably cost more than my parents' entire mortgage. The exhaust from my old car formed a gray cloud that seemed to offend the very air of the Emerald Estate. I gripped the peeling steering wheel, feeling the familiar vibration that had been my companion for over a decade. I could have driven the G-Wagon parked in my garage. I could have taken the Maybach. But today required a costume. Today I needed to be exactly who they thought I was. The failure, the disappointment, the poor sister. Looking through the windshield, I took in the massive iron gates of the resort. Gold leaf accented the swirling metal patterns catching the Georgia sun. Beyond the gates, the driveway was lined with century-old oak trees, their branches draped in Spanish moss that swayed gently in the breeze. It was breathtaking. I should know. I signed the deed for this property 6 months ago. I paid $15 million in cash to save this historic landmark from bankruptcy. But my family did not know that. To them, I was just Nia, the college dropout who sold insurance door to door. As I watched the valet park a cherry-red Ferrari, a bitter taste rose in my throat. My sister Keisha had rented out the entire estate for the weekend. The bill for the venue alone was $80,000. I knew for a fact that my father had skipped his heart medication for 3 months to save money for this deposit. I knew my mother had taken out a predatory loan just to pay for the floral arrangements. They were bleeding themselves dry to impress people who did not care about them all, while treating me like the family stain. Seeing them parade around my property drinking champagne, they could not afford acting like royalty, on land owned by the daughter they despised. It ignited a cold fire in my chest. I watched the security guard up ahead. He was checking names on a velvet clipboard, bowing and scraping to the guests in luxury cars. When he looked at my Toyota, his lip curled in disgust. He stepped into the road, hand raised, stopping me before I could even reach the kiosk. He had no idea he was blocking the path of the woman who signed his paychecks. I rolled down the window, the manual crank squeaking in protest, and prepared myself for the first battle of the day. The security guard loomed over my driver's side door, his mirrored sunglasses reflecting my tired expression and the rusted hood of my Corolla. He did not even bend down to speak to me at eye level. Instead, he tapped his knuckles against the glass, a sharp, impatient sound that grated on my nerves. I rolled the window down the rest of the way, letting the humidity of the Georgia afternoon invade the car. "Deliveries are around the back near the service entrance," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. He was already looking past me, waving a hand to usher the black Mercedes behind me to go around. "I am not a delivery driver," I said, keeping my voice calm, despite the heat rising in my cheeks. "My name is Nia Jenkins. I am the sister of the bride." The guard stopped mid-wave. He slowly lowered his head to look at me properly for the first time. He slid his sunglasses down his nose, revealing eyes that held zero respect. "Jenkins," he repeated, dragging the name out as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. He lifted the velvet-covered clipboard he was holding and flipped a page with an exaggerated sigh. His finger traced down the list of VIPs past the senators and the local celebrities until it stopped at the very bottom of the page. "Ah, yes, here we are." He looked back at me, a smirk playing on his lips. "I am afraid I cannot let you in, Ms. Jenkins. Your name is on the restricted list. In fact, it is the only name on the do not admit list." I gripped the steering wheel harder, my knuckles turning white. Restricted list. My own sister had put a security ban on me at her wedding. Not just an uninvite, but a formal security protocol. On whose authority I asked, though I already knew the answer. The bride herself, Miss Keisha Jenkins, gave us strict instructions this morning. The guard said, enjoying his moment of petty power a little too much. She said an individual matching your description driving a vehicle exactly like this heap might attempt to crash the reception. She was very specific about the car. He chuckled, glancing at the peeling paint on my door. Said it would be an eyesore next to the senator's Bentley. I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my throat. Keisha was thorough, I had to give her that. She knew exactly which buttons to push to try and make me feel small. I suppose she told you I was a desperate relative looking for a handout, I said, staring straight ahead. The guard shrugged his shoulders, moving with an arrogant swagger. She said you were a liability. His hand went into his jacket pocket, and he pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The paper stock was heavy and expensive, the kind of stationery you use for elegant wedding invitations, not for humiliating your own blood. She told me to give you this if you showed up. She called it a consolation prize. He thrust the envelope through the open window, not even waiting for me to take it before dropping it onto my passenger seat. It landed with a heavy thud that sounded louder than the engine. Take my advice, lady, he said, stepping back and adjusting his uniform belt. Take whatever is in there and turn this junker around before we have to escort you off the premises. We do not want to make a scene in front of the real guests. Real guests. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. He was standing on pavement. I paid for wearing a uniform I approved enforcing rules on a property that belonged to me, and he was treating me like a trespasser. I looked at the envelope on the seat beside me. It looked innocent enough, but I knew it contained a weapon designed to destroy my dignity. The cacophony of car horns behind me reached a fever pitch. The driver of the Bentley was leaning on his horn with aggressive entitlement, and I could see the woman in the Escalade shouting something about moving my piece of junk off the road. The noise washed over me like a physical wave, but I did not flinch. My entire world had narrowed down to the cream-colored envelope resting in my hands. The security guard tapped his foot, his hand resting on his holster, impatient for me to disappear and clear the way for the important people. I took my time sliding my finger under the wax seal, breaking it with a satisfying snap. I pulled out the contents right there in the middle of the driveway, letting everyone wait. First came the check. It was a personal check from my father's account. The handwriting on the amount line was shaky, probably because he was stressed about money he did not have, but the signature was my mother's aggressive loop. $500. The amount was written in bold black ink. $500 to buy my absence. $500 to erase me from my own sister's life. Beneath the check was a note written on personalized stationery that had Keisha's new monogram embossed in gold. I read the words and felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. Naya, take this and go. Please do not make a scene. Go to a spa. Fix your hair. Buy a dress that does not look like it came from a thrift store. We have senators here. People of influence. I cannot have you standing next to them looking like a charity case. Do this one thing for me. Just disappear. The guard was watching me closely, leaning in to see the reaction. He expected the tears. He expected the shame to crumple my face. He expected me to put the car in reverse and slink away, grateful for the scraps thrown from the high table. But the tears did not come. Instead, a laugh bubbled up from my chest. It was a cold, sharp sound that felt like breaking glass. Keisha thought $500 was a fortune. She thought she was being generous. She did not know that the flower arrangements lining the driveway cost more than this check. She did not know that I spent $500 on a Tuesday lunch with my investors. She was trying to pay off a millionaire with pennies. I looked up at the guard, meeting his eyes through his mirrored shades. The smirk on his face faltered when he saw my expression. I was not broken. I was furious. I took the check and the note, holding them up so he could see. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, I tore them down the middle. The sound of ripping paper was lost under the honking horns, but it rang loud in the silence of the car. I stacked the pieces and tore them again. And again. until Keisha's insults were nothing but expensive confetti in my palm. I threw the handful of scraps directly at the glass of his booth. They fluttered against the window like snow, landing in a heap on the pavement. I do not need her money, I said, my voice cutting through the noise, but I am coming in. The guard was reaching for his radio, his face twisted in a snarl of authority, challenged. He was calling for backup, likely preparing to have me forcibly removed from the entrance of my own property. I ignored him, my attention shifting to the phone in my hand. I dialed the private line of the resort's general manager, a man I had hired personally 3 months ago. He answered on the first ring, his voice professional and crisp. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, sounding surprised to see my personal number pop up on a Saturday. "We were not expecting you until next week." "Change of plans?" I said, my voice low and steel hard. "I am at the main gate right now." I could hear the immediate rustling of fabric and the click of keys as he likely scrambled to check the security feeds. "I see," he said, the professional veneer cracking just slightly. "I will come down immediately to escort you. That guard is new, he does not know who." "No," I cut him off. "You will stay exactly where you are. You will not come down, not. You will not radio the gate. And you will absolutely not announce my arrival to anyone inside that ballroom. Do I make myself clear?" There was a heavy pause on the line. He was confused, terrified of making a mistake, but he valued his job too much to disobey a direct order. "Crystal clear, ma'am," he finally whispered. "But the security protocols—" "I will handle security," I said. "Just make sure the presidential suite is unlocked and the vintage wine cellar is accessible. I have a feeling my family is going to drive me to drink today." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The guard was now banging on the hood of my Toyota with the flat of his hand, shouting instructions that I could barely hear over the blood rushing in my ears. He looked like he was about to draw his weapon. It was time to end this charade. I shifted the car into drive and let it roll forward a few inches, just enough to force him to stumble back. I pulled up alongside the keypad pedestal. It was a high-tech interface, brushed steel and glowing blue LEDs, designed to intimidate anyone who did not have a reservation. The guard was screaming now, something about police and trespassing charges. I rolled down the window and leaned out. "You might want to step back," I said, not shouting, just projecting my voice with the absolute certainty of someone who holds the keys to the kingdom. He hesitated, confused by my lack of fear. I reached out and typed a 6-digit code into the keypad. It was not the guest code Keisha had printed on her invitations. It was not the vendor code for the florists. It was the master override code, a sequence known only to 3 people in the world: the system architect, the general manager, and the owner. The keypad did not just beep. It emitted a long, melodious chime that signaled a priority entry. The LED ring turned a brilliant, welcoming green. The massive iron gates, which were designed to keep the riffraff out, shuddered and began to swing inward with a majestic, silent grace. The guard dropped his radio. He stared at the opening gates, then at the keypad, and finally at me. His jaw was literally hanging open. The system was never supposed to open for a beat-up Corolla. It was a glitch in his reality. I did not offer him a smirk or a wave. I simply pressed the gas pedal. As my car rolled past him, I saw him scrambling to pick up his radio, stuttering into the receiver, trying to explain the impossible. I drove up the winding, tree-lined avenue, the canopy of oaks embracing me, driving straight into the heart of the estate I owned, ready to crash the party of the century. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped into a world that smelled of money and desperate ambition. The grand ballroom of the Emerald Estate was designed to intimidate, and today it was doing its job perfectly. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a prism of light over the sea of guests. I recognized those chandeliers immediately. I had approved the invoice for them 6 months ago, a staggering $50,000 apiece, imported directly from Italy. The walls were draped in sheer silk voile, and the floor was covered in a custom white plush carpet that I knew cost more per square foot than my first apartment. Every surface screamed wealth. Every detail was curated to project an image of effortless luxury. And then there was me. I stood in the entryway wearing a charcoal gray blazer I had bought on sale 3 years ago, and black slacks that had seen better days. My shoes were sensible flats scuffed at the toes, not the red-bottomed heels that clicked rhythmically across the marble floors around me. In this room filled with sequined gowns, tailored tuxedos, and diamonds that caught the light with aggressive sparkle, I stood out like a bruise on perfect skin. I could feel the atmosphere shift the moment I crossed the threshold. It started as a ripple near the entrance, a turning of heads, a whispering behind manicured hands, and then it spread like a contagion. My Aunt Sarah was the first family member to spot me. She was holding a glass of champagne near the chocolate fountain, and when her eyes landed on me, her expression curdled. It was not just surprise, it was pure, unadulterated contempt. She nudged my cousin David, who turned and looked me up and down with a sneer that said I was nothing more than trash that had blown in from the street. I could hear the murmurs starting the low buzz of gossip that follows the family disappointment. "Look at her," one woman whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Did she not get the memo that this is a black tie event?" Another voice chimed in. "That is Nia, the one who sells insurance. I heard she is barely making rent. Why is she even here?" They looked at me as if I were a stain on their perfect picture, a reminder of the struggle they all pretended to have left behind. They scrutinized my hair, my unpolished nails, my lack of jewelry. I felt their judgment like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, trying to make me shrink, trying to make me turn around and run back to my old car. But I did not shrink. I stood tall, letting their scorn wash over me. They saw a poor relation crashing a high society wedding. I saw tenants partying in my house without paying the rent. Suddenly, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, but not out of respect. A woman in a shimmering gold silk dress stormed toward me, her face contorted in a mask of fury that she was barely keeping contained behind a layer of heavy foundation. It was my mother Eleanor. She looked like a church matriarch gone rogue. Her wide-brimmed hat threatened to take flight with the speed of her angry approach, and the massive fake diamond necklace around her neck clattered against her collarbone with every heavy step. She did not greet me with a smile. She did not open her arms for a hug. Instead, she clamped a hand around my upper arm, her manicured nails digging into my flesh, with surprising strength, and yanked me sideways with enough force to make me stumble. "Move," she hissed under her breath, a sound like steam escaping a pressure cooker. "We are not doing this here." She dragged me past a towering ice sculpture of a swan and shoved me into a narrow alcove near the kitchen service doors, away from the prying eyes of her precious guests. The smell of her expensive perfume mixed with the scent of industrial cleaner from the kitchen, creating a nauseating combination that made my stomach turn. She spun around to face me, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with panic and rage. "Are you insane, Nia? Did you lose the little mind you have left? I told Keisha to send you money. I told her to make sure you stayed away. But here you are standing in the middle of the most important day of this family's history, looking like you just crawled out of a dumpster." I pulled my arm from her grip, rubbing the spot where her nails had left red crescent marks on my skin. "Hello to you too, Mother," I said, my voice flat and devoid of the fear she wanted to see. "I see you got the check." I returned it. "I did not want your charity. You never want to listen, do you?" She poked a finger at my chest, striking the lapel of my cheap blazer hard. "Look at you. Just look at yourself. We have Senator Davis out there. We have the governor's wife drinking cocktails. We have the editor of Atlanta High Society magazine taking photographs right now, and you walk in here wearing that. You look like the help, Nia. Actually, the help looks better because at least they are wearing uniforms that fit. You look like a stain on a white tablecloth. You look like a walking disaster meant to embarrass us." Her eyes darted around, frantically checking the corridor to see if anyone important had followed us. When she was satisfied we were alone, she turned the full force of her venom back on me, her voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. This wedding is not about you. It is about Keisha. It is about her future. She is marrying into a dynasty. She is elevating this family to a level you could never dream of. And I will not let her jealous, bitter failure of a sister ruin it, because she cannot stand to see someone else succeed. You are here to beg, aren't you? You are here to corner the senator and ask for a job, or try to get Marcus to give you a loan for that failing life of yours. I know you, Nia. I know you are struggling with that pathetic insurance job, or whatever it is you do now. But you are not going to humiliate us today. I will not allow it. The words hit me with the familiarity of an old song I had heard variations of my entire life. Keisha was the star, the diamond, the hope. I was the dirt she stood on to reach higher. My mother's face was inches from mine, her breath hot on my face. You are going to turn around, she demanded, her voice shaking. You are going to walk out that back door, and you are going to get in that rust bucket you drive, and you are going to leave immediately. If anyone asks who you were, I will tell them you were a caterer who got lost. Do not speak to the guests. Do not look at the groom. And for the love of God, do not let the senator see you. You are a blemish, Nia. A mistake we are trying to hide. Now go, before I have to call security, and have them throw you out like the trash you are dressing up as. Trash. I repeated the word, tasting the bitterness on my tongue. You call me trash, mother, but I do not see Keisha stepping up when the real world comes knocking. You talk about embarrassment, you talk about shame, but you seem to have a very selective memory when it comes to who actually keeps this family afloat. I took a step closer to her, invading her personal space for once, making her lean back against the cold kitchen wall. Do not think I have forgotten last November. Do not think I have forgotten the phone call I got at 3 in the morning. Her eyes flickered with something that might have been guilt if she were capable of it, but it was quickly replaced by annoyance. That was different, she snapped. Your father was sick. It was an emergency. Yes, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Dad had a massive stroke. He was lying in the ICU at Grady Memorial, and the doctors said he needed immediate surgery. Advanced cardiovascular surgery that insurance refused to cover because you missed the premium payments again. You stood there in the waiting room crying about how you were going to lose him. You called Keisha first, didn't you? You called your precious star your future senator's wife. And what did she say, Mother? Tell me what the golden child said when her father's life was on the line. She said she couldn't help, Eleanor blurted out, defensive, now her hands fluttering to her pearl necklace. She was in the middle of launching her boutique. Her capital was tied up in inventory. She couldn't just liquidate her assets on a whim. She has a brand to protect, Nia. You cannot expect someone with her visibility to just throw money around without considering the business implications. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Business implications. She was buying handbags, Mother. I saw her Instagram stories. She was in Miami buying Birkins while Dad was fighting to breathe. But when you called me, when you told me you needed $50,000 cash by sunrise, or they wouldn't operate, I didn't ask about my brand. I didn't ask about my inventory. I wired the money in 10 minutes. $50,000, Mother. That is more than you have earned in the last decade. That is more than Keisha has ever made in her entire life. So what? Eleanor hissed, straightening her spine and regaining her haughty composure. You want a medal for doing what you are supposed to do. You want a parade because you helped your father. That is your job, Nia. That is your role in this family. Keisha was born to be the face of this family. She is the beauty. She is the charm. She is the one who brings us glory. You. She looked me up and down with a sneer that cut deeper than any knife. You are the worker. You are the mule. You do not have a husband. You do not have children. You do not have a reputation to maintain, or a social circle to impress. What else are you going to do with your money? Hoard it. Spend it on lonely dinners for one. The cruelty of her logic took my breath away. In her twisted world, my success only existed to service Keisha's ambition. My hard-earned money was just a safety net for their reckless spending. You think because I am single my money belongs to you? I asked, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. You think because I don't plaster my life on social media that I don't have a future worth protecting? I think you owe us, Eleanor said, cold and final. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. And since you turned out so plain, so unexceptional, the least you can do is support the one child who actually has a chance at greatness. Keisha is going to change the world. She is going to be powerful. And you should be honored to pay her way. You should be grateful that you get to contribute to her legacy. Because let's face it, Nia, you will never have a legacy of your own. You are the soil we walk on to get to the stars. Now stop throwing your little tantrums about $50,000. It is gone. It is spent. It is in the past. If you bring it up to the senator's family, I swear I will tell everyone you stole it. I will tell them you are a thief and a liar, and I will have you arrested. Do not test me, Naya. I will sacrifice you to save her without blinking an eye. My mother checked her diamond-encrusted watch and then glared at me with eyes that held zero maternal warmth. You have exactly 1 minute to vanish, she hissed. If you are still breathing my air in 60 seconds, I am flagging down the head of security. I will tell him you are a stalker. I will tell him you threatened me. I will have you dragged out of here by your hair if that is what it takes to protect this wedding. She reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. Do not think I will not do it, Nia. I have erased you from this family once today, and I will do it again physically this time. This is your last warning. Get out. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the desperation behind the makeup. I saw the fear that her house of cards was about to collapse. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to fix it for her. I did not feel the need to be the good daughter who absorbed the pain so everyone else could be comfortable. I felt powerful. I crossed my arms over my chest and planted my feet firmly on the marble floor I owned. Make the call, I said, my voice challenging her. Go ahead, Mother. Call security. Call the police. Scream for help at the top of your lungs. I want you to do it. She froze her thumb, trembling over the dial button. You are bluffing, she whispered. You are trying to call my bluff, but you will lose. I took a step forward, invading her space, forcing her to look up at me. I am not bluffing. I am waiting. Call them over here. Let us see what happens when the men with the badges arrive. Let us see who they salute and who they escort off the premises. You think you have the power here because you are the mother of the bride. But you forget that in the real world, power does not come from titles or borrowed prestige. It comes from ownership, and right now, you are standing on very thin ice. So go ahead, Eleanor, make the call. I want to see the look on your face when you realize exactly who you are trying to evict from their own property. The heavy oak doors swung open, and a team of 4 security guards marched in, moving with the synchronized purpose of men used to handling unruly drunks or paparazzi. They were imposing figures in dark suits, earpieces coiled against their necks. The guests nearby fell silent immediately, their champagne glasses lowered, as their eyes darted between the approaching wall of muscle and the woman standing alone in a cheap blazer. This woman is harassing me, Eleanor announced, her voice projection perfect for the back row of the church choir. She raised a hand, pointing an accusatory finger directly at my face. She is a disgruntled former employee who is trying to extort money from the family. She has been stalking the bride and making threats against the senator's family. I want her removed immediately. The head guard, a man I did not recognize, stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. Ma'am, you need to come with us, he said, his voice loud enough to carry over the hushed whispers of the crowd. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Eleanor beamed. It was a smile of pure, triumphant malice. She turned to the crowd of onlookers who had gathered, drawn by the spectacle. I am so sorry, everyone, she declared, smoothing her silk dress as if brushing off dirt. It is so hard to find good help these days, This woman was fired months ago for stealing, and now she thinks she can crash my daughter's wedding to cause a scene. It is pathetic, really. She looked back at me, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Did you really think you could just walk in here and ruin Keisha's big day, Nia? You are nothing. You are a jealous, bitter little girl who cannot stand to see her sister shine. Look at you. You are wearing rags at a black tie event. You do not belong here. You never belonged here. Now get out before you embarrass yourself any further. The crowd murmured in agreement, shaking their heads at the audacity of the crasher. I saw the senator's wife lean in to whisper something to her neighbor, a look of distaste on her face. Eleanor soaked it up, playing the victim and the hero all at once. She stood taller, fueled by the attention, confident that she had successfully framed the narrative. She thought she had won. She thought she had crushed me under her designer heel. She had no idea she had just handed me the microphone. The sound of hurried footsteps clattered against the marble floors, interrupting my mother's tirade. A man in an immaculate tuxedo burst through the crowd, moving with a frantic energy that was entirely out of place for someone of his stature. It was Arthur Henderson, the general manager of the Emerald Estate. He was a man who usually glided through rooms with the silent grace of a ghost. But right now he was sprinting. His face was flushed, and beads of sweat were visible on his forehead. He looked terrified. My mother's eyes lit up when she saw him. She interpreted his haste as concern for her, the paying client, the mother of the future senator's wife. She smoothed her dress and adjusted her hat, composing herself into the picture of an aggrieved matriarch. She stepped forward, blocking his path to me, assuming his rush was entirely for her benefit. She assumed he was running to save her reputation. "Mr. Henderson, thank goodness you are here," she announced, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I was just telling these security guards that they are not moving fast enough. This woman is a menace." She gestured at me with a flick of her wrist as if I were a fly she wanted swatted. "She has crashed our private event, she is harassing the guests, and she refuses to leave. I want you to personally oversee her removal. I want her banned from the property permanently." Henderson skidded to a halt, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He looked bewildered, his eyes darting frantically around the scene, taking in the security guards, the crowd of whispering guests, and finally my mother, who was looming over him with an expectant sneer. My mother did not wait for him to speak. She took his silence for deference. "Do not just stand there," she snapped, clapping her hands together. "Do your job. Get this trash out of my daughter's wedding. If she is not gone in 2 minutes, I will be speaking to your corporate office. I will have your job. Do you know who we are? Do you know who my son-in-law is? We are paying a fortune for this venue, and I expect a certain caliber of environment. This person is polluting it." She turned back to the crowd, beaming with the confidence of a woman who believes the world revolves around her credit limit. She thought she had won. She thought the cavalry had arrived to execute her orders. She had absolutely no idea that the man she was barking orders at answered to only one person in the entire world. And that person was standing right in front of her wearing a $20 blazer. Mr. Henderson did not stop. He did not slow down. He did not even blink in my mother's direction. He breezed past her outstretched hand as if she were nothing more than a decorative statue in the hallway. The air from his movement ruffled the feathers on her hat, leaving her hand hanging in empty space. The smile on her face faltered, then froze into a mask of utter confusion. She turned her head, trying to track him, trying to understand why her command had been ignored, but he was already gone from her orbit. He came to a halt directly in front of me. The man who ran the most exclusive resort in Georgia, who commanded a staff of hundreds and managed the egos of politicians and celebrities, stopped inches from my scuffed flat shoes. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the kitchen seemed to die away. And then, right there in front of the senator, his wife, my entire family, and the security team that was seconds away from grabbing me, Arthur Henderson bowed. It was not a polite nod. It was not a casual greeting. It was a deep, respectful 90-degree bow, the kind usually reserved for royalty or heads of state. He held the position for a long heartbeat, letting the weight of the gesture sink into the minds of everyone watching. When he straightened, his face was pale, but his eyes were filled with a desperate need to please. "Madam Chairwoman Jenkins," he said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, "please accept my most humble and profound apologies for this unacceptable delay. We had a catastrophic failure in our vehicle recognition system at the main gate. It will be rectified immediately. I have already fired the technician responsible." A gasp rippled through the crowd. I heard a glass shatter somewhere near the bar. My mother made a sound like a dying engine, a strangled choke of disbelief. She took a stumbling step forward, her face draining of all color. "Chairwoman," she repeated the word, tasting like ash in her mouth. "Mr. Henderson, you are mistaken. This is Nia. She is nobody. She sells insurance." Henderson turned to her, then his expression shifting from reverence to ice-cold professional disdain. "I assure you, madam, I make no mistakes regarding the leadership of this company." He turned back to the room, raising his voice to address the security team and the gawking guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, please step back. The security team will stand down immediately. You are currently detaining the sole owner and proprietor of the Emerald Estate. Miss Nia Jenkins acquired this entire property 6 months ago. The transaction was $15 million, paid entirely in cash. She owns the ground you are standing on, the walls around you, and the roof over your heads. She is the signatory on every check and the final authority on every decision made within these gates." The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. $15 million. Cash. The words echoed in the silence, bouncing off the silk-draped walls. The senator looked at me with new eyes, assessing, calculating. The guests who had sneered at my blazer suddenly looked terrified, wondering if I had noticed their disrespect. And my mother, she looked as if she had been slapped by the hand of God himself. She stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing, unable to process the reality that the daughter she had called a failure was actually the landlord she had been trying to impress all along. I looked at Henderson and gave him a small nod. "Thank you, Arthur," I said calmly. "Now about that room." The silence that followed Henderson's announcement was heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually happens right before a building collapses. My mother Eleanor, who had been a towering figure of rage just moments ago, seemed to shrink physically. The color drained from her face so completely that her expensive foundation stood out in stark orange streaks against her pale skin. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, but no sound came out. The hand holding her champagne glass began to tremble, the crystal stem clicking rhythmically against her diamond rings. It was the only sound in the room. She looked at Henderson, searching for a sign that this was a joke, a mistake, a prank. But Henderson remained bowed, his posture one of absolute deference. She looked at the senator, who was now staring at me with a calculating intensity. Finally, she looked at me. For the first time in my life, her eyes didn't hold contempt or judgment. They held pure, unadulterated fear. She was looking at a stranger. The daughter she had bullied, the girl she had discarded, the woman she had just tried to have thrown into the street, was suddenly the most powerful person in her world. Her reality was fracturing, the pieces falling around her feet, and she had no idea how to put them back together. I watched the realization wash over her. It was slow and painful. She realized that every insult she had hurled at me in the last 10 minutes had been heard by the staff I paid. She realized that the security guards she had summoned were now looking to me for orders, not her. She realized that the very air she was breathing belonged to me. She took a stumbling step back, her heel catching on the plush carpet. She looked like she was going to crash into the ice sculpture she had dragged me past earlier. I moved then. I didn't rush. I didn't run. I walked toward her with the slow, deliberate pace of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to go. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide corridor between us. I could hear their whispers changing. They weren't talking about my shoes anymore. They were talking about the $15 million. I stopped inches from my mother. She flinched, actually flinched, as if she expected me to strike her. Instead, I reached out. My hands, which she had called rough and unladylike countless times, moved to the collar of her gold silk jacket. It was askew, pulled out of place by her earlier theatrics. With gentle, almost tender movements, I smoothed the fabric down. I adjusted her lapel. I straightened the pearl necklace she wore like armor. It was an intimate gesture, something a loving daughter would do, but the coldness in my eyes made it a display of dominance. I was touching her, fixing her, and she was too terrified to move. I leaned in close, invading her personal space just as she had invaded mine in that dirty kitchen hallway. I brought my lips right to her ear, so close that my breath stirred the hair she had spent hours styling. The room strained to hear what I would say, but this message was just for her. "Mother," I whispered, my voice soft but hard as diamonds. "You look like you are about to be sick. You should take a deep breath, but be careful how you exhale. You are standing on my marble floors. You are drinking vintage champagne from my private cellar. The flowers, you are smelling the roof over your head, the ground beneath your feet. It is all mine." I pulled back just enough to look her in the eye, my hands still resting on her shoulders, pinning her in place. I saw the tears welling up in her eyes, tears of humiliation, not sorrow. I smiled, a small, cold curving of my lips. "Enjoy the party, Eleanor. Drink the wine, eat the food, but do not drop that glass. I would hate for you to stain my floor. It is imported, and unlike you, it has real value." The heavy oak doors creaked open again, and a hush fell over the room. But this silence was different. It wasn't the silence of awe or shock. It was the uncomfortable silence of pity. A nurse in a plain blue uniform pushed a wheelchair into the ballroom. Slumped in the seat, looking small and fragile, was my father, Joe. He was wearing a suit, but it wasn't a tuxedo like the other men. It was an old charcoal gray suit I remembered him wearing to church when I was 10 years old. The fabric was shiny with age at the elbows and knees. The cuffs were frayed. A button was missing from the jacket, replaced by a safety pin that glinted under the chandeliers. He looked like a ghost from a different life, haunting a party he wasn't invited to. His face was gaunt, his skin having a grayish pallor that spoke of illness and neglect. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, gripped the armrests of the wheelchair as if he were holding on for dear life. He looked around the room, his eyes wide and bewildered, taking in the opulence, the flowers, the ice sculptures. It was as if he had been dropped onto an alien planet. Then his gaze landed on my mother, standing in her gold silk dress, dripping with jewelry. He didn't look at her with love. He looked at her with fear. And then he saw me. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment the confusion cleared. He saw his daughter, Nia. He saw the girl who used to sit on his lap and read the newspaper. He saw the woman who had paid for his surgery when everyone else had turned away. Tears welled up in his eyes, spilling over his weathered cheeks. He tried to raise a hand to wave, but it trembled too much and fell back into his lap. His lips moved, forming my name, but no sound came out. The guilt in his eyes was a physical force. It hit me in the chest, stealing my breath. He knew. He knew what they had done to me. He knew about the lies, the exclusion, the cruelty, and he felt powerless to stop it. He was a prisoner in his own family, dragged out as a prop for their perfect picture, while being denied the basic dignity of a new suit, or perhaps even proper care. Seeing him like that, broken and ashamed in the middle of their celebration, broke something inside me that I didn't think could break any further. It turned my cold anger into a blazing inferno. I crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides, ignoring the gasps of the onlookers and the sudden frantic movement of my mother toward us. I dropped to my knees beside the wheelchair, ignoring the potential stains on my trousers from the spilled champagne on the floor. "Dad," I said softly, my hand covering his trembling one. His skin was cold, clammy to the touch. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, his chest heaving with shallow, rattling breaths. He was struggling for air, each inhale a battle against his own failing body. "What is wrong?" I asked, my voice sharp with panic. "Are you okay?" He shook his head weakly, his hand clawing at his chest. I looked at the nurse, a young woman who looked overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "Why is he breathing like that?" I demanded. "Is he having another attack?" "He has been like this all morning," the nurse whispered, leaning in so only I could hear. "He missed his morning dose. We ran out yesterday." Ran out. I repeated the words, feeling heavy and foreign on my tongue. "How do you run out of heart medication? It is a prescription. You refill it." The nurse looked down at her shoes, shame coloring her cheeks. "Mrs. Jenkins said we had to wait until next week. She said the copay was too high this month. She said the wedding expenses came first." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I looked at my father, really looked at him. I saw the gray tint to his lips, the sweat beading on his forehead, the terror in his eyes as his heart struggled to beat without the medicine it desperately needed. I reached for the small leather pouch attached to the side of his wheelchair, the one he always used to carry his pills. My fingers fumbled with the zipper, tearing it open. Inside, there was nothing. No amber bottles, no blister packs, just a few crumpled receipts and a layer of dust. It was empty, hollow, just like the promises my family had made to care for him. My hand shook as I held the empty bag open, staring into the void where his lifeline should have been. A close-up shot of neglect, a portrait of cruelty painted in the negative space of missing pills. They had dressed him in a suit, wheeled him out like a prop to complete their perfect family tableau, but they had denied him the very thing keeping him alive. They had chosen centerpieces over his heartbeat. They had chosen silk napkins over his breath. The rage that filled me then was not hot or fiery. It was cold. It was absolute. It was the kind of anger that burns down cities and salts the earth so nothing ever grows again. I slowly zipped the bag shut, the sound loud in the sudden silence of the room. I stood up, my knees cracking, and turned to face the room. I turned to face my mother. And God help her, because I was done being the daughter who forgave. My father's hand, frail and trembling, reached out and gripped my wrist. His skin felt like dry parchment, thin and fragile against my own. He pulled me closer, his eyes swimming with unshed tears that magnified the fear and shame lurking there. "Nia." He wheezed, his voice a ragged whisper that barely carried over the low hum of conversation in the room. "Don't be angry with her. She just wanted everything to be perfect. Perfect." The word hung in the air, grotesque and distorted. I looked at him, at the way his chest hitched with every breath, at the blue tint coloring his lips. Perfect was a $20,000 dress. Perfect was a 10-tier cake. Perfect was a wedding that looked like a fairy tale while the father of the bride was slowly suffocating in the background. "Why, Dad?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to stay strong. "Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me you needed medicine? You know I would have sent it. I would have driven it to you myself." He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "She wouldn't let me." He confessed, a single tear escaping and tracking a path through the stubble on his cheek. "She took my phone, Nia. 2 months ago. She said we had to cut back. She said the copays were eating into the budget for the venue. She said Keisha deserved a Vera Wang. She said it was the only way to make sure the photos looked right. She promised it would only be for a little while, just until the wedding was over. A Vera Wang." My mother had traded my father's heart medication for a designer label. She had gambled his life for a few yards of silk and lace. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. It wasn't just neglect. It was a calculation. A cold, hard calculation where my father's life was worth less than a dress. I looked across the room at my mother. She was laughing at something the senator's wife had said, her head thrown back, her neck exposed, that fake diamond necklace glittering under the lights. She looked radiant. She looked happy. She looked like a woman without a care in the world. She didn't look like a woman who was slowly killing her husband to fund a party. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp, twisting knife in my gut. I thought I knew how low she could go. I thought her cruelty was limited to words, to insults, to financial abuse. But this was something else entirely. This was monstrous. I looked back at my father, at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had snuck me candy when Mom said no, who had always tried in his own weak way to love me. He was dying. Right here in front of everyone, he was dying so his daughter could play princess. And he was letting it happen. Because he loved them more than he loved himself. Or maybe because he was just too tired to fight anymore. I felt a sob rising in my throat, hot and burning. I swallowed it down. Now was not the time for tears. Tears were for grief, and I wasn't grieving yet. I was furious. I was incandescent with rage. My hand tightened around his, not in comfort, but in a promise. A promise that this ended today. A promise that they would pay for every missed pill, every shallow breath, every moment of fear he had endured in silence. "It's okay, Dad," I whispered, smoothing the hair back from his damp forehead. "It's okay. I'm here now. And I'm going to fix this. Not the wedding, not the party. I'm going to fix the only thing that matters, you. And then I'm going to burn their perfect little world to the ground." I slowly released my father's hand and stood up. The sorrow that had threatened to drown me moments ago evaporated instantly, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a diamond cutting glass. I looked around the ballroom. The crystal chandeliers sparkled like mockery. The scent of expensive white roses felt cloying and suffocating, masking the rot underneath. I saw my mother clinking glasses with the senator's wife. I saw Keisha preening for a photographer, her $20,000 dress swirling around her like a cloud of stolen dreams. They were dancing on the edge of a volcano, and they did not even know I was the one holding the match. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was an execution. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contact I had saved simply as legal. I had hesitated before. I had thought about mercy. I had thought about family. But looking at my father gasping for air in his frayed suit while his wife drank vintage champagne, that thought died. I pressed call. It rang once. "Yes, Ms. Jenkins." The voice on the other end was sharp, alert, ready. "Execute Protocol 0. I said, my voice low and steady, carrying the weight of a judge passing sentence. There was a brief pause on the line, a moment of stunned silence. "Are you sure, ma'am? That releases the full portfolio. The personal debts, the foreclosure notices, the credit card fraud records. Once we bring those files into the room, there is no going back. The damage will be total." I looked at Keisha, laughing, her head thrown back in a pose she had practiced in the mirror. I looked at Marcus, the groom, adjusting his silk tie, blissfully unaware that his financial ruin was standing 20 feet away. "Bring it all," I ordered. "Bring the physical files. I want the paper trail. I want the wet signatures. And bring the projector team. I want every single digit of their debt displayed in high definition." "Understood. We are 2 minutes out." I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. A strange calm settled over me. It was the calm of a general who has just ordered the final strike. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer and turned my gaze toward the stage. The band was playing a soft jazz number. Waiters were circulating with trays of caviar. The air was filled with the hum of polite conversation and the tinkling of silverware. It was a perfect, beautiful lie. I started walking toward the front of the room. I did not rush. I moved with the inevitability of a coming storm. My heels clicked against the marble, a steady rhythm that sounded like a countdown. 1 minute left. 1 minute until the music stopped. 1 minute until the fantasy died. 1 minute until I showed everyone in this room exactly what happens when you build a castle on a foundation you do not own. I caught my mother's eye across the room. She frowned, seeing me moving with such purpose, seeing the cold determination etched on my face. She took a step toward me, opening her mouth to scold me, to tell me to get back in my corner. But I just smiled. It was a smile that did not reach my eyes, a smile that promised nothing but devastation. "You wanted a show, Mother," I thought. You wanted a memorable wedding. Well, I am going to give you one. The orchestra swelled to a crescendo, signaling the arrival of the main attraction. The double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open, and there she was, Keisha, my little sister, the golden child. She did not just walk into the room, she floated, carried on a tide of unearned adoration and stolen money. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, a $20,000 Vera Wang confection that hugged her curves and trailed behind her like a royal train. It was white, pure, and innocent, everything she was not. Surrounding her was a phalanx of bridesmaids in shimmering lavender gowns, a giggling, preening barrier of toxic positivity. They were laughing at something she said, their heads thrown back in synchronized adoration, acting less like friends and more like courtiers to a queen. Keisha soaked it up. She beamed at the photographers, blew kisses to the crowd, and twirled slightly to let the light catch the diamond tiara perched on her head. She looked triumphant. She looked untouchable. She looked like a woman who believed she had successfully scammed her way into the aristocracy. I watched her from my seat in the front row, a prime spot Arthur had cleared for me just moments ago. I crossed my legs and settled back, my expression impassive. To anyone else, I might have looked like a proud sister awaiting the ceremony. But inside, I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I was watching a lamb prance happily toward the slaughterhouse, completely oblivious to the blade hanging just above its neck. She was so loud. Her laughter rang out above the music, a shrill, demanding sound that grated on my ears. She stopped to accept compliments from the senator's cousin, preening under the attention, her hand resting possessively on the diamond necklace that I knew she had not paid for. She was living her fantasy, the culmination of years of scheming and taking. She thought she had pulled it off. She thought she had successfully erased me, buried her debts, and secured her future. She moved through the room, treating the guests like her subjects, stopping only for those she deemed important enough to acknowledge. I saw her eyes scan the crowd, looking for approval, looking for envy. She wanted everyone to see her, to want to be her. She had no thought for our father gasping for air in the corner, no thought for the lies she had told to get here. In her mind, this was her moment and nothing else mattered. She was the sun, and we were all just planets orbiting her brilliance. It was a display of narcissism so pure, it was almost breathtaking. And as she drew closer to the front of the room, her smile widened, unaware that every step brought her closer to the end of her world. She had no idea that the sister she had tried to banish with $500 was now sitting in the judge's chair, and the gavel was about to come down hard. Her gaze swept across the front row, expecting to see the senator's family or perhaps a high-ranking local official. Instead, her eyes locked onto me. I was sitting in the high-backed velvet chair reserved for the guest of honor, my legs crossed casually, my expression one of polite boredom. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Keisha stopped mid-twirl. Her smile vanished like a candle blown out in a hurricane. For a second, she just stared, her brain unable to comprehend the visual data. Nia, the sister she had banished. Nia, the broke insurance saleswoman, was sitting in the best seat in the house, sipping her champagne. The transformation was terrifying. The blushing bride vanished, replaced by the spoiled brat I had known since childhood. Her face twisted into a snarl that distorted her carefully applied makeup. She forgot the cameras. She forgot the senator. She forgot the image she had spent years cultivating. She gathered up her $20,000 skirt in her fists and stomped down the stairs from the dais, her heels clacking aggressively against the wood. Security. She shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. Someone get security right now. Why is she still here? I told you to get rid of her. She marched right up to where I sat, ignoring the gasped whispers of her guests. She loomed over me, trembling with rage. How dare you? She hissed, saliva flying from her lips. How dare you sit there? Who did you pay off? Did you give the manager $100 to let you sneak in? Is that it? You used your rent money to bribe the staff just so you could ruin my moment. She spun around, pointing a shaking finger at Arthur Henderson, who was standing stoically nearby. I want her gone. I want her thrown out on the street. Do you hear me? She is a trespasser. She is nobody." Then she turned back to me, her eyes filled with a toxic mix of pity and hatred. "Look at you, Nia. You are pathetic. You are so jealous of me you cannot even stand it, can you? You cannot stand that I am marrying a rich man. You cannot stand that I am beautiful and successful and happy while you are just a bitter old spinster with nothing. You came here to steal my spotlight because you know you will never have one of your own. You are disgusting. Get out of my chair. Get out of my wedding. Get out of my life before I make you regret ever being born." She reached out her hand, curving into a claw, intending to physically drag me out of the seat. She was so blinded by her own entitlement, she did not see the trap closing around her. She thought she was shouting at an intruder. She did not realize she was screaming at her landlord, and her lease was about to expire. Keisha snatched a glass of heavy red Cabernet from a passing waiter's tray. Her movements were jerky and uncoordinated, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated rage. I saw the intent in her eyes before her arm even moved. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to stain my cheap blazer with expensive wine, to mark me as the mess she desperately wanted everyone to believe I was. "You want to be part of the party, Nia," she shrieked, her voice shrill and breaking. "Then have a drink on me." She lunged forward, swinging the glass in a wide arc aimed directly at my face. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the dark red liquid sloshing against the crystal rim. I saw the manic desperation in her eyes. And I saw the absolute sloppy carelessness of her attack. She was used to people letting her win. She was used to people stepping aside or taking the hit to keep the peace. She had never been in a fight where her opponent fought back. I did not step back. I did not cower. I moved with the precision of a cobra striking. My hand shot out and clamped around her wrist mid-air. The impact was solid and jarring. I squeezed hard, digging my thumb into the sensitive tendon of her inner wrist. The glass wobbled dangerously, spilling wine over her white-gloved hand, but not a single drop touched me. We stood there, locked in a tableau of violence. Keisha struggled, trying to yank her arm back, but I held her fast. My grip was iron. It was the grip of a woman who had carried the weight of this family for a decade, while Keisha had never carried anything heavier than a shopping bag. "Let go of me," she screamed, struggling against my hold. "You are hurting me. I am saving you." I said, my voice calm and conversational, as if we were discussing the weather and not standing in the middle of a ballroom brawl. "Because red wine is notoriously difficult to get out of silk, Keisha. Especially when that silk belongs to a $20,000 custom Vera Wang gown." She froze, her eyes darting from my face to the wine trembling in her hand. "What are you talking about?" she hissed. "Daddy paid for this dress. It is mine." I smiled, a cold, humorless expression that felt tight on my face. "Daddy tried to pay for it. He used the Black American Express card, didn't he? The one linked to the family emergency fund. The one he thinks has an unlimited limit because the bill always magically gets paid." Her struggling ceased. A flicker of true fear replaced the anger in her eyes. "I pay that bill, Keisha. Me. Every month. And 10 minutes ago I called the bank. I reported the card stolen. I flagged every transaction made in the last 48 hours as fraudulent. That includes the deposit on this venue. That includes the caterer. And it most definitely includes that dress you are wearing." I leaned in closer, tightening my grip just enough to make her wince. "So tell me, little sister, when the bridal boutique calls the police for theft of services, whose credit card are you going to use to bail yourself out? Because Dad is tapped out, Mom is broke, and Marcus, we both know he does not have a dime to his name." I released her wrist with a sharp shove. She stumbled backward, her high heels slipping on the polished floor. The wine glass fell from her numb fingers and shattered against the marble. The dark red liquid exploded outward, splashing across the hem of her pristine white dress, seeping into the delicate lace like a spreading wound. She stared at the stain in horror, realizing that the ruin she had intended for me had just become her own reality. The word debt hit Keisha like a physical blow. It was a dirty word in her vocabulary, a word that belonged to other people, to poor people, to people like me. Not to her. She looked down at the spreading wine stain on her dress, and then back up at my face, and I saw the moment her reality fractured. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking gray and sickly beneath the layers of bronzer. She took a step back, her hands trembling as she smoothed the ruined silk of her gown. "You are lying," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "You are just trying to scare me. Daddy has money, Marcus has money, we are not broke. We are not like you." She looked around the room, her eyes wild and searching. She needed a shield. She needed a weapon. She needed a man to step in and put me back in my place, because in her world, problems were solved by men with checkbooks and last names that opened doors. Her gaze landed on the groom's side of the room. Marcus, her savior, her ticket to the high life. He was standing near the bar laughing with his groomsmen, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding on the dance floor. "Marcus," she screamed, the sound tearing through the polite murmur of the ballroom. "Marcus, get over here right now." The desperation in her voice was palpable. It was the cry of a drowning woman. Marcus turned, his smile faltering as he saw his bride distress. He set his drink down and adjusted his tuxedo jacket, smoothing the lapels with a practiced, arrogant gesture. He began to walk toward us, his stride long and confident. He looked every inch the part of the wealthy scion Keisha believed him to be. He had the walk of a man who had never been told no. Keisha threw herself at him as soon as he was within reach, clutching his arm with a grip that must have been painful. "Marcus, handle her," she demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is crazy. She is saying terrible things. She says Daddy credit cards are locked. She says we are in debt. Throw her out, Marcus. Call your father. Call the police. Tell her who we are. Tell her she cannot speak to us like this." Marcus wrapped an arm around her waist, patting her reassuringly, but his eyes were on me. He looked annoyed, like I was a fly that had landed in his soup. He did not recognize me yet. Why would he? I was just the sister in the background, the one Keisha complained about. He saw a woman in a cheap blazer standing on his dance floor, ruining his wife vibe. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Keisha and me, puffed up with the false bravado of a man who thinks his last name is a shield against consequences. "You need to leave," he said, his voice deep and booming, meant to intimidate, meant to command the room. "You are upsetting my wife. I do not know what kind of game you are playing coming in here with these lies, but it ends now. My father is Senator Davis. Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you are in? We have security here. We have influence. If you do not walk out of here on your own 2 feet, I will make sure you are carried out in handcuffs." He took another step closer, looming over me, trying to use his height and his expensive cologne to cow me into submission. He thought he was the apex predator in this room. He thought he was saving the damsel from the dragon. He had absolutely no idea that he was a gazelle barking at a lion. I watched him posture. I watched him threaten. And I felt a smile spread across my face. A smile so cold it could have frozen the wine in the glasses of the guests watching us. I waited for him to finish his little speech. I waited for him to feel big and powerful. Because the fall is always so much more satisfying when they start from a height. Marcus stepped forward like he was walking onto a campaign stage. He adjusted his silk tie with a flick of his wrist, a gesture so practiced it looked rehearsed in a mirror. He was handsome in that generic expensive way, perfectly groomed hair teeth capped to a blinding white and a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. But his eyes were empty. They held the dull shine of a man who has never had to earn a single thing in his life. He positioned himself in front of me, blocking my view of Keisha acting the part of the gallant protector. He looked down his nose at me, his lip curling in a sneer that he probably thought looked authoritative. To me, he just looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. "You seem to be confused about where you are," he said, his voice booming enough to catch the attention of the nearby tables. This is a private event. This is a very exclusive event, and you are disturbing my wife. I stayed seated, my legs crossed, my expression bored. I did not give him the satisfaction of standing up. I did not give him the respect of looking intimidated. I simply swirled the champagne in my glass, watching the bubbles rise. Are you deaf? He snapped, stepping closer, invading my personal space. I said you need to leave, now, before I have to make a phone call that will end very badly for you. He leaned down, placing his hands on the arms of my chair, trapping me. It was meant to be a power move. It was meant to scare me. Do you know who my father is? He whispered, his breath smelling of scotch and mint. Senator Davis. He has the police commissioner on speed dial. He has judges in his pocket. One word from me, and you will not just be thrown out of here, you will be thrown in a cell. You will be buried under so many legal fees, you will never see daylight again. So be a smart girl. Take your little blazer and your cheap shoes and crawl back to whatever hole you came from. We do not want you here. You are nothing. He straightened up, smoothing his jacket, satisfied that he had put the poor relation in her place. He turned back to Keisha, a smug smile plastered on his face, expecting her to swoon at his masterful handling of the situation. He thought he was the king of the castle. He thought his last name was a magic wand that could make problems disappear. He had no idea he was threatening the one person who held the deed to his entire future. I stood up slowly, unfolding myself from the chair with a deliberate grace that contrasted sharply with Marcus' frantic energy. I did not need to shout. I did not need to puff out my chest. I simply rose to my full height, smoothed my blazer, and smiled. It was the smile of a cat who has just cornered a particularly slow mouse. Hello, Marcus, I said, my voice smooth and pleasant. It has been a while, since last Tuesday, I believe. Marcus blinked, confusion flickering behind his arrogant facade. He squinted at me, trying to place my face, trying to connect the woman in the cheap blazer with someone from his country club life. I do not know you, he scoffed, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. I do not associate with people like you. Oh, but you do. I corrected him, stepping closer, so that only he and Keisha could hear the full weight of my words. You associate with me quite often, Marcus, usually via email, usually begging. Does the name Jenkins Commercial Real Estate ring a bell? The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a magic trick. His eyes went wide, his mouth falling open in a perfect O of shock. Jenkins? He whispered the name, coming out like a prayer. You are Ms. Jenkins. The one and only, I confirmed, keeping my tone conversational. I am the one who owns the building on Peachtree Street. You know, the one where you opened that flagship shoe store. The one you swore was going to revolutionize luxury retail. Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing in his throat. He looked around nervously, terrified that someone might be listening. Ms. Jenkins, please, this is not the time. It is exactly the time, I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. Because last Tuesday, Marcus, you sat in my office. You cried. You literally cried on my mahogany desk, begging for an extension on your lease. You told me sales were down. You told me investors were pulling out. You told me you needed just one more month to turn things around. You owe me 6 months of back rent, Marcus. $200,000. He looked like he was going to be sick. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his carefully styled hair suddenly looking limp. Please, he hissed, his voice a desperate whisper, do not do this. Not here, not in front of them. And yet here you are, I continued, ignoring his plea. Standing in a tuxedo that probably cost more than your monthly payment, throwing a wedding you cannot afford, threatening to have me arrested. Did you use my rent money for the deposit, Marcus? Did you take the cash meant for your lease and spend it on champagne and ice sculptures? I leaned in close, smelling the fear rolling off him in waves. You threatened to bury me in legal fees. That is funny, Marcus, because my legal team has already drafted your eviction notice. It is sitting on my desk right now, along with the lawsuit for breach of contract. So tell me again about your father, the senator. Tell me again about your influence. Because from where I am standing, the only thing you have influence over is how quickly you can pack up your failed business before the sheriff arrives to lock the doors. Marcus looked at Keisha, then back at me, his expression crumbling. He was not the powerful scion anymore. He was just a broke man in a rented suit caught in a lie he could not pay his way out of. I watched the realization dawn on him. He had not just threatened a wedding crasher, he had threatened the woman who held his financial life in her hands, and he had done it in front of an audience. The ballroom felt like it was shrinking around Marcus. The air conditioning was humming. The guests were murmuring, but all he could hear was the blood rushing in his ears. He stared at me, and I saw the exact moment his world collapsed. It wasn't a slow realization, it was a sudden, violent impact. The confident sneer he had worn just moments ago melted away, leaving behind the face of a terrified child caught stealing from the cookie jar. His eyes, which had been so full of disdain, were now wide and glassy with panic. He looked at me, not as a nuisance, but as the executioner holding the axe above his neck. He took a stumbling step back, his legs suddenly unable to support the weight of his own lies. His hands, which had been so steady when he adjusted his tie, were now trembling violently at his sides. He looked at Keisha, who was watching him with growing confusion and horror, and then back at me, pleading silently with his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out, just a dry croak of fear. "Ms. Jenkins," he finally whispered, his voice shaking so badly it was barely audible. "Please, not here, I beg you." I did not move. I did not blink. I just stood there, watching him squirm. "You had a lot to say a minute ago, Marcus," I reminded him, my voice carrying easily in the tense silence. "You were going to call the police. You were going to have me arrested. What happened to all that influence? What happened to the judges in your pocket?" He fell to his knees. It wasn't a graceful descent. He simply collapsed as if his strings had been cut. He landed hard on the marble floor, his expensive tuxedo pants straining at the knees. He reached out, grabbing the hem of my blazer with desperate fingers. "Please!" He begged, tears now streaming freely down his face, ruining his perfect tan. "I will pay you back. I swear. Every cent. Just give me a little more time. The wedding gifts, the cash envelopes. I will give it all to you. Just please do not ruin this for me." The crowd gasped. The sight of the groom on his knees weeping at the feet of the woman he had just tried to evict was too much for even the most polite society guest to ignore. Phones were raised, cameras flashing, capturing his humiliation for posterity. Keisha let out a strangled sound, a cry of pure mortification, as she realized her Prince Charming was begging for mercy from the sister she despised. "You are going to pay me with wedding gifts?" I asked incredulously, my voice dripping with disdain. "You are going to take the money meant for your future with my sister and use it to pay off your past mistakes. That is your plan. That is how you start a marriage. By stealing from your wife before the ink is even dry on the license. I never meant for it to get this bad," he sobbed, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. "I just wanted to be someone. I wanted to impress her. I thought the store would take off. I thought I could make it work." "You thought you could fake it until you made it," I corrected him. "But you forgot the most important part, Marcus. You have to actually make it. And you didn't. You failed. And instead of owning up to it, instead of being honest, you doubled down. You dragged my sister into your mess. You dragged my family into your debt. You stood there and threatened me in my own house while wearing a suit you probably rented on credit." He looked up at me, his face a mask of utter despair. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry. Please, just don't tell them. Don't tell my parents. They will disown me. They will cut me off." I looked at him, this pathetic man kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of his own ego. I felt no pity. I felt no sympathy. I only felt disgust. He was willing to sacrifice everyone around him to save his own skin. He was willing to let my father die for a dress. He was willing to let me be humiliated to protect his lie, and now he wanted mercy. "Get up," I said, my voice cold and hard. "You look ridiculous. And save your tears. You are going to need them when your parents find out you are not the business genius they think you are. You are just a con artist with a good tailor, and the con is over Marcus." I stepped over Marcus, not even looking down as he scrambled to grab at my pant leg again. He was sobbing openly now, his mascara, or maybe it was just dirt from the floor, streaking his face. I didn't care. He was yesterday's news. He was a footnote in the story I was about to tell. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble. The crowd parted for me again, but this time it wasn't out of shock or confusion. It was out of fear. They had seen what I did to Marcus. They had seen the power shift in real time. They knew I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was the one holding the remote control. I climbed the steps to the dais where the DJ had set up his equipment. The poor man looked terrified, his hands hovering over his turntables, as if he wasn't sure whether to play a song or run for the exit. I reached out and took the microphone from its stand. The feedback whine made a few people wince, but I didn't adjust it. I wanted them uncomfortable. I wanted them on edge. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, amplified to a volume that demanded attention. "If I could have your eyes up here, please." The room fell silent instantly. Even the waiters stopped moving, their trays held frozen mid-air. Everyone was looking at me, the senator, his wife, my mother, who was still leaning against the wall, looking like she was about to faint, Keisha, who was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and terror, and Marcus, still on his knees, looking like a broken toy. "I know you were all expecting a touching video montage right about now," I continued, my voice smooth and professional, the voice of a CEO addressing a shareholder meeting. "You were expecting baby photos, first dates, maybe a tearful interview about how they met and fell in love. You were expecting a fairy tale." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But fairy tales are expensive. And as we have just established, some people in this room have a problem with paying their bills. So instead of a love story, we are going to watch a different kind of presentation. Think of it as a financial disclosure, or perhaps a reality check. I signaled to the tech guy in the booth, a young man I had briefed via text just moments before. He didn't hesitate. He knew who signed his checks, too. The massive LED screen behind me flickered to life. The image of two interlocking hearts that had been displaying as a placeholder vanished. In its place appeared a stark white document with black text. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't pretty, it was a balance sheet. "I apologize for the change in programming," I said, turning slightly to gesture at the screen. "But I believe in transparency, especially when it involves my family's money and my property. So if you will all direct your attention to the screen, we are going to take a little journey through the financial history of this wedding. And trust me, it is a lot more interesting than how they met." The first slide appeared. It was a scanned copy of an email. The subject line read, "Urgent rent extension request." The sender was Marcus. The recipient was me. The crowd gasped as they read the desperate pleading words projected 10 feet high. I watched their faces. I watched the shock turn to realization. And I knew that there was no going back now. I had burned the bridge and I was about to blow up the wreckage. The giant LED screen behind me flickered to life, casting a harsh blue glow over the dimmed ballroom. The first image materialized pixel by pixel until it was 10 feet tall. It was a screenshot of an email dated 3 months ago. The subject line read, "Urgent request regarding rent payment." The sender was Marcus. I stepped aside so the senator and his wife could get an unobstructed view of their future son-in-law's financial strategy. The text was magnified, crisp, and undeniable. "Dear Ms. Jenkins, I know I am 4 months behind on the lease. Please do not initiate eviction proceedings. I am marrying into a prominent family soon. I plan to use the cash gifts from the wedding reception to pay the back rent plus interest. Just give me until the honeymoon is over." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It sounded like a balloon deflating. I looked at the senator. His face had turned a dangerous shade of purple. He was reading the words of a man who was essentially selling his family name to pay a landlord. Marcus was still on the floor, but he had stopped crying. He was staring up at the screen with the hollow look of a man watching his own funeral. But I was not done. I clicked the remote in my hand and the slide changed. This one was uglier. It was a credit card statement. Not mine, not Marcus's. It was my father's Platinum American Express statement. The one he had guarded for 30 years. The one that was supposed to be his safety net for old age. I pointed to the highlighted line items with a steady hand. June 15th, Vera Wang Bridal, $20,000. June 20th, the Emerald Estate Deposit, $10,000. July 2nd, Cartier Diamond Earrings, $5,000. The list scrolled down the screen, a cascade of luxury purchases that seemed endless. Total balance due $52,000. Status past due. "This is how my sister paid for her fairy tale," I announced, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a scalpel. She did not use her own money. She did not use her fiancé's money, because, as we have just seen, he does not have any. She used the life savings of a man sitting in a wheelchair in the back of this room. A man who is currently gasping for air because he could not afford a $30 copay for his heart medication. She stole her father's security to buy a dress she will wear for 6 hours. She emptied his emergency fund to pay for flowers that are already wilting. I looked down at Keisha. She was shaking her head violently, mouthing the word no over and over again, as if denial could erase the digital proof towering over her. But the numbers did not lie. The dates did not lie. Everyone in the room could see the timeline. The charges started exactly when my father stopped picking up his prescriptions. The dates aligned perfectly with his physical decline. "You wanted to look like royalty, Keisha," I said, my voice dropping to a register that vibrated with suppressed rage. "You wanted the world to envy you. Well, here is the cost. It is printed in black and white on a statement you thought no one would ever see. You stole from the man who raised you. You let him suffer in silence so you could sparkle for an afternoon, and now everyone knows exactly what that sparkle cost." The room was deathly quiet. No one was drinking champagne anymore. No one was admiring the decor. They were staring at the screen, mesmerized by the banality of the evil displayed there. It was just numbers, just dates and dollar amounts. But together they told a story of selfishness so profound it made the air in the room feel toxic. I clicked the remote one last time, bringing up the final document. A foreclosure notice on my parents' house dated 2 weeks ago. The final nail in the coffin of their perfect image. Senator Davis stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. He was a man who had built a career on public image, on the careful curation of respectability. He had shaken hands with presidents. He had dined with kings. And now he was standing in a room full of Atlanta's elite, watching his family name being dragged through the mud by a balance sheet. His face was a mottled red, a dangerous color that clashed with his crisp white shirt. Beside him, his wife, Mrs. Davis, looked as if she had swallowed a lemon whole. Her hand was pressed to her chest, clutching her pearls, as if they were the only thing anchoring her to reality. The senator looked at Marcus, his son, his heir, his disappointment. He looked at the screen, where the evidence of Marcus's failure was glowing in high definition. Then he looked at my mother, Eleanor, who was shrinking into herself, trying to disappear into the silk drapes. Finally, he looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes when he looked at me. There was something worse. There was recognition. He recognized power. He recognized that I was the one holding the cards, and he knew exactly what that meant for his son. He turned to Marcus, his voice a low rumble that carried more threat than a shout. "You told me the business was thriving. You told me the expansion was fully funded by private investors. You told me you were building an empire." Marcus looked up from the floor, his face streaked with tears and dirt. Dad, please, I can explain. It was just a cash flow problem. I just needed a little more time. Cash flow problem. The senator roared, his composure finally cracking. You are being evicted, Marcus. You are begging for extensions like a common debtor, and you are doing it while throwing a six-figure wedding you cannot pay for. Do you have any idea what this will do to my campaign? Do you have any idea what the press will do with this senator's son evicted on wedding day? It is a headline, Marcus. It is a scandal. And you invited it right into our lives. Mrs. Davis let out a small sob, turning her face away from her son. I cannot believe you lied to us, she whispered. We trusted you. We vouched for you. We introduced you to our friends, and all this time you were just playing dress-up with our money. The senator turned his gaze to Keisha, who was still standing frozen in her wine-stained dress. And you, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. You knew, didn't you? You knew he was broke. You knew he was a fraud. But you didn't care. You just wanted the title. You just wanted the name. You are just as bad as he is. You are a gold digger who dug in an empty mine. He straightened his jacket, buttoning it with a sharp, decisive movement. This wedding is over, he announced to the room. There will be no ceremony. There will be no reception. My family will not be associated with thieves and liars. We are leaving. And Marcus, if you ever want to see a dime of your inheritance again, you will be in my office on Monday morning with a full confession and a plan to fix this mess. Until then, you are on your own. He offered his arm to his wife, who took it with a shaky hand. Together, they marched out of the ballroom, their heads held high, trying to salvage what little dignity they could from the wreckage. They did not look back. They did not say goodbye. They simply excised the cancer from their lives and walked away, leaving their son kneeling in the ruin of his own making. The guests watched them go, the silence heavy and absolute. The dynasty had fallen, and everyone had a front row seat. The heavy double doors swung shut behind the senator and his wife, sealing the fate of my mother's social ambitions. The sound echoed like a gavel striking a judge's bench. Eleanor Jenkins stood alone in the center of the dance floor, her gold dress shimmering under the unforgiving lights. She looked at the closed doors, then at the guests who were now openly staring at her with expressions of disgust and pity. She looked at Marcus, who was still weeping on the floor. And finally, she looked at me standing on the stage holding the microphone that controlled the room. Something inside her snapped. It was visible, a physical break in her composure. The carefully cultivated mask of the high society matriarch cracked and fell away, leaving behind a woman consumed by panic and raw, unbridled narcissism. She did not run to her husband, who was still wheezing in the back. She did not run to comfort her sobbing daughter. She ran toward me. She scrambled up the stairs to the stage, her heels catching on the carpet, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked like a wild animal, cornered and desperate. She lunged for the microphone, her hands clawing at the stand. I did not fight her. I simply stepped back and let her take it. I knew what was coming. I knew that give a narcissist enough rope and a loud enough speaker, and they will hang themselves every single time. She clutched the mic with both hands, her knuckles white, the feedback screeching as she brought it too close to her mouth. "You ungrateful child," she screamed, her voice distorted by the speakers booming over the terrified crowd. "You think you have won. You think you are so smart with your receipts and your little slideshow. You know nothing about the real world. You know nothing about what it takes to survive in this town." She turned to the audience, her eyes wild, pleading with them to understand her twisted logic. She gestured frantically with her free hand, the diamonds on her wrist flashing. "I did it for this family," she yelled, the veins in her neck bulging. "Do you think it is easy maintaining this image? Do you think respect is free? I had to make hard choices. Yes, I used the credit cards. Yes, I cut the medication budget. So what? Joe is old, he has lived his life. But Keisha is young. She is our future. She needed this wedding. We needed this alliance with the senator." The crowd recoiled. A collective gasp of horror rippled through the room. She was admitting it. She was saying the quiet parts out loud, screaming her confession into a high-definition audio system. She was confirming every single accusation I had made, and she did not even realize it. She thought she was justifying herself. She thought she was explaining the necessary sacrifices of leadership. I had to prioritize. She continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. Who cares about a few pills when the family name is at stake? Who cares about $50,000 when we were about to merge with a political dynasty? I did what a mother has to do. I secured our legacy. And you, Nia, you selfish little brat, you ruined it. You care more about your money and your property than you do about our reputation. You let your father sit there in that cheap suit just to spite me. You could have paid for all of this. You have millions. Why didn't you just write the check? Why didn't you just let us have this one day? She was crying now, but they were tears of frustration, tears of a woman who believes the world owes her everything. I deserve this, she sobbed into the mic. I deserve to be the mother of a senator's wife. I deserve the respect. I have worked my fingers to the bone keeping up appearances. I have lied and borrowed and scraped just to make us look good. And you destroyed it all because you were jealous. You destroyed us because you couldn't stand being the ugly sister in the background. I watched her unravel. I watched her strip away every layer of dignity she had left. She was confirming the financial abuse, the medical neglect, the pathological obsession with status. She was telling the world that she viewed her husband as expendable and her children as tools for social climbing. Phones were recording everywhere. This wasn't just a wedding disaster anymore. It was a viral moment. It was evidence for the police. It was the end of Eleanor Jenkins. She finally stopped panting heavily, the microphone drooping in her hand. She looked out at the silent, horrified faces of her friends and neighbors. She looked for validation. She looked for someone to nod and say, "Yes, Eleanor, we understand." But there was only silence. Cold, judging, absolute silence. And in that silence, the truth of what she had just done finally began to sink in. She hadn't saved her reputation. She had just signed her own confession. The spell broke with the sound of a chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. It was the governor's wife. She did not say a word. She did not look at my mother with sympathy or even anger. She looked at her with something far worse. She looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. It was the look one gives to something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of a shoe. She smoothed her skirt as if she had sat in something dirty and signaled to her security detail. Without a backward glance, she turned and walked toward the exit. That was the signal. The dam broke. The room erupted into a chaotic symphony of departure. The elite of Atlanta, the people my mother had bankrupted her family to impress, were fleeing the scene of the crime. They did not want to be associated with fraud. They did not want to be seen near a woman who admitted to neglecting her dying husband for social clout. It was a mass exodus of tuxedos and ball gowns, a flowing river of judgment pouring out the double doors. My mother stood on the stage watching them go. She reached out a hand as if she could physically pull them back. "Wait!" she cried, her voice cracking. "Please do not go. There is dessert. We have cake. It is all a misunderstanding. Please stay." But no one stayed. They ignored her pleas as if she were a ghost. They stepped over the spilled wine. They navigated around Marcus still weeping on the floor. They moved with the swift efficiency of rats leaving a sinking ship. Then came the phones. It started as a few isolated flashes, but soon a sea of blue light illuminated the darkened room. They were not filming the decor anymore. They were filming the breakdown. I saw a young woman near the front, a socialite my sister had desperately tried to befriend, holding her phone high. The screen showed a live stream interface. The viewer count was ticking up rapidly. Hundreds, then thousands. The comments were scrolling so fast, they were a blur of text, but I caught words like monster and abusive and karma. My mother's confession was no longer contained within these walls. It was beaming out to the world at the speed of light. Every tear, every scream, every admission of guilt was being broadcast, recorded, and shared. The reputation she had killed for the image she had sacrificed my father for was being dismantled pixel by pixel in real time. She wasn't just losing her friends, she was becoming a global pariah. I watched her realize it. I watched her eyes lock onto the phones recording her. She put her hands over her face, trying to hide, trying to block out the lenses, but it was too late. The internet never forgets, and tonight it was hungry. Senator Davis stopped near the exit doors, his silhouette framed by the late afternoon light streaming in from the hallway. He turned back one last time, not to look at the wreckage of the party, but to look at his son. Marcus was scrambling to his feet, slipping on the wet marble, his tuxedo stained and rumpled. He looked nothing like the confident young entrepreneur the senator thought he had raised. He looked small, weak, and pathetic. "Dad, wait!" Marcus cried out, stumbling toward his parents. His hands reached out in a begging gesture. "Please, just listen to me. I can explain everything. It is just a temporary setback. I have a plan." The senator held up a hand, palm out. It was a gesture of absolute finality. "Stop!" he commanded, his voice booming with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Do not take another step. Do not open your mouth to spew more lies. I have heard enough. I have seen enough. You brought me here under false pretenses. You introduced me to these people, these grifters, and you let me vouch for you. You let me put my reputation on the line for a sham." Mrs. Davis, standing beside her husband, refused to even look at her son. She stared fixedly at a point on the wall, her face a mask of frozen humiliation. "Mom?" Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. "Mom, please tell him. She has nothing to say to you." The senator cut in ice in his tone. "You are a liar, Marcus. You are a thief. And as of this moment you are no longer my concern. Do not come to the house. Do not call my office. If you show your face at my campaign headquarters, I will have you arrested for trespassing. You wanted to be a big man. You wanted to play with the grown-ups. Well, congratulations, son. You are on your own. Figure it out." With that, the senator turned on his heel and guided his wife out the door. They walked with a brisk, determined pace, putting as much distance between themselves and the disaster as possible. Marcus stood frozen, his hands still outstretched, reaching for a lifeline that had been severed. He let out a strangled sob and slumped against the doorframe, watching his future drive away in a black town car. Behind me, a sound like a wounded animal tore through the silence. Keisha had been watching the scene unfold, her eyes darting back and forth between her fleeing in-laws and her broken fiancé. The reality of her situation crashed down on her with the weight of a collapsing building. The title of senator's daughter-in-law was gone. The access to power and money was gone. The image she had sacrificed our father's health for was gone. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the dance floor. The $20,000 dress billowed around her, a white silk puddle stained with red wine. She beat her fists against the floor, her diamond nails clicking against the stone. "It is not fair," she shrieked, her face contorted into an ugly mask of grief. "This was supposed to be my day. I was supposed to be someone." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had spent hours perfecting. "You did this!" she screamed, pointing an accusing finger. "You ruined my life. I hate you. I hate you." She curled into a ball, sobbing hysterically, rocking back and forth in the ruin of her own greed. She cried for the lost status. She cried for the lost money. But even now, as she lay on the floor in a puddle of wine and tears, she did not shed a single tear for the father she had almost killed to get there. She was mourning her ambition, not her morality. The silence in the ballroom was heavy and suffocating. It settled over the wreckage of the wedding like dust after a demolition. My mother stood alone on the stage for a moment, her chest heaving as she watched the last of her social standing disappear out the exit doors. She looked at the empty tables. She looked at the abandoned cake. Then she looked at Keisha, sobbing on the floor, a broken princess in a ruined dress. Finally, she looked at me. I saw the gears turning in her mind. I saw the calculation behind her tear-filled eyes. She realized in that terrifying moment of clarity that the senator was gone, Marcus was broke, and her husband was incapacitated. There was only one person left in the room with a checkbook. There was only one person who could stop the bleeding. Me, the daughter she had tried to throw out. She scrambled down the stairs, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She did not run to comfort Keisha. She did not run to check on my father. She ran straight to me. She threw herself at my feet, her knees hitting the hard marble with a sickening thud. She wrapped her arms around my legs, burying her face in the fabric of my cheap trousers, essentially trapping me in place. "Nia, baby, please!" she wailed, her voice thick with a performance of grief that would have won an award on daytime television. "You have to help us. You are the only one who can fix this. Look at your sister. Look at her, Nia. She is devastated. Her life is over." She looked up at me, mascara streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had spent hundreds of dollars on. She clutched my hands, pulling them toward her chest. "You cannot let this happen. You cannot let them laugh at us. You saw how they looked at me, Nia. You saw the disgust. They will tear us apart. The church members, the neighbors, the club. We will be pariahs." I looked down at her, feeling nothing but a cold, distant pity. She was not crying because she had hurt me. She was not crying because my father was sick. She was crying because she had been embarrassed. "You have the money," she pleaded, her grip tightening. "It is nothing to you, Nia. $15 million. You could pay off Marcus's debt with pocket change. You could buy Keisha a new house. You could make all of this go away. Just write a check. Tell the senator it was a misunderstanding. Tell him you will cover everything. He will listen to you now. He knows you have power." She was bargaining with my dignity, using my success as a shield for her failures. She wanted me to buy back the respect she had lost. She wanted me to pay for the privilege of being their savior after they had treated me like their servant. "We are family," she sobbed, resting her cheek against my hand. "Family helps each other. I know I was hard on you. I know I said things I should not have said. But I was just stressed. I wanted the best for you. I wanted you to be tough. And look at you now. You are so strong. You are so successful. I made you strong, Nia. Doesn't that count for something? Please, baby, don't let your mother end up in the street. Don't let your sister be a laughingstock. Save us, Nia. Be the good daughter I know you are." I looked down at the top of her head, at the expensive hat that was now crooked and sliding off. Her tears were soaking into my trousers, but I did not feel wet. I felt dry. I felt arid. I felt like a desert where nothing could ever grow again. She was clinging to me with a strength born of pure avarice. She was not holding on to her child. She was holding on to her lifestyle. She was holding on to the country club membership and the designer shoes and the illusion of wealth she had cultivated for decades. She was hugging a lottery ticket she had thrown in the trash and was now desperately trying to smooth out. I slowly peeled her fingers off my hands one by one. Her grip was tight, desperate clawing, but I was stronger. I had spent years carrying the weight of her disappointment, and that kind of heavy lifting builds muscle. I pushed her back gently but firmly until she was supporting her own weight on the cold floor. I took a step back, creating a physical chasm between us that mirrored the emotional one she had dug years ago. "You do not love me, Mother," I said, my voice devoid of the anger that had fueled me earlier. Now there was only a vast, empty fatigue. "You love what I can do for you. You love that I saved my father's life, not because you wanted him alive, but because you did not want to be a widow in debt. You love that I own this building, not because I achieved something great, but because it means you do not have to pay for your party. You love my money, Eleanor. You love the access. You love the safety net, but you hate the girl who earned it." She shook her head violently, her mouth opening to spill more lies, more excuses, more manipulations. I raised a hand, stopping her before she could speak. "Save it," I told her. "I am done listening. I am done being the backup plan. I am done being the shadow you step on to reach the light." You called me an ATM for years, not with words but with your actions. Whenever there was a bill you could not pay, whenever there was a mess Keisha made, whenever reality came crashing down on your fantasy world, you came to me. You punched in my code, you took what you needed, and you walked away without even saying thank you. Well, the machine is broken, Mother. The account is closed. There are no more withdrawals allowed. I looked at her huddled on the floor, a pathetic figure in a ruined golden dress. You wanted a rich daughter? Well, you have one. But the funny thing about money, Mother, is that it gives you choices. And I choose to spend mine on people who actually care if I live or die. Me and my money are leaving. You can keep the debt. You can keep the shame. You can keep the consequences. Those are the only things you ever truly earned on your own. I turned away from her, ignoring her wails. I had one more thing to do before I left this place forever. One person to save from the fire she had started. I looked toward the back of the room where the wheelchair sat lonely and forgotten in the shadows. It was time to get my father out of hell. I raised my hand high above my head and snapped my fingers twice. The sound was crisp and sharp, echoing in the cavernous room. The side doors near the stage burst open. 4 paramedics in crisp private uniforms rushed in, pushing a state-of-the-art gurney loaded with monitoring equipment. They moved with a speed and precision that made the hotel staff look like amateurs. They were not hotel employees. They were not city EMS. They were my private medical team on retainer for my executives, and today they had only one patient. They swarmed my father's wheelchair, bypassing the wreckage of the wedding party like it was invisible. One paramedic immediately placed an oxygen mask over his face, while another checked his vitals with efficient professional touches. My father looked up at them, confusion clouding his eyes, but he did not resist. He was too weak to fight, too exhausted by the neglect to question the sudden arrival of help. "What is going on?" my mother shrieked, scrambling to her feet, her mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. "Where are you taking him?" "That is my husband. You cannot just take him." She lunged toward the gurney, her hands reaching out to grab the rails to stop the momentum, to assert her control one last time. But a large man in a dark suit stepped into her path. He was my head of personal security, a man named Titus, who looked like he could bench press a small car. He did not touch her. He simply stood there, a wall of muscle and stone blocking her access to her victim. "Mrs. Jenkins," Titus said, his voice deep and rumbling, like distant thunder. "Step back. Mr. Jenkins is under the medical guardianship of his daughter, Nia Jenkins, effective immediately. Any attempt to interfere with his transport will be considered assault on a medical team." "Guardianship?" she sputtered, blinking up at him. "What guardianship? I am his wife. I make the decisions." "Not anymore," I said, walking past her to stand beside the gurney. I held up a document, a durable power of attorney for healthcare signed by my father 6 months ago, during a lucid moment when you were too busy shopping to visit him in rehab. He knew this day would come, Mother. He knew you would eventually choose your vanity over his life. So he gave me the power to save him when you failed. I looked down at my father. His eyes were open now, focused on me above the mask. He reached out a trembling hand, and I took it, squeezing gently. "You are going to be okay, Dad," I whispered. "We are going to the best cardiac center in the state. No more skipped pills, no more stress. Just rest and recovery." He nodded, a single tear escaping the corner of his eye. He looked at my mother standing impotently behind the security guard, and then he looked away. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. He was choosing life. He was choosing the daughter who saved him over the wife who was killing him. "Let us move," I commanded. The team sprang into action, wheeling the gurney toward the exit at a brisk pace. I walked alongside them, my hand still holding my father's. We swept out of the ballroom, leaving my mother screaming impotently at our backs, leaving Keisha sobbing in her ruined dress, leaving Marcus broken on the floor. We left the toxic kingdom they had built on lies and neglect, and we did not look back. Outside, the air was fresh and clean, an ambulance wait sleek and modern, its lights flashing a silent promise of rescue. As they loaded him in, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. He was safe. The rest was just paperwork. The ambulance siren faded into the distance, a mournful wail that marked the end of my father's suffering and the beginning of his freedom. I watched the red lights disappear around the bend of the long driveway before turning back to the two women standing on the curb. My mother and sister stood huddled together, shivering in the evening air, not from cold but from shock. They looked like refugees from a war they had started and lost. Inside, I said, it was not a suggestion. It was a command issued with the authority of the property owner. They did not argue. They did not protest. They simply turned and walked back into the main building, their heads bowed. We bypassed the ballroom where the staff was already sweeping up the broken glass and dismantling the floral arrangements. We walked in silence down the corridor to the VIP suite, a private room reserved for high-stakes negotiations and exclusive guests. It was a room designed for power, and tonight it would serve its purpose well. I opened the door and ushered them in. The room was silent, hermetically sealed against the noise of the cleanup outside. The air was cool and smelled of expensive leather and polished wood. I walked to the head of the long mahogany conference table and sat down. My mother and Keisha hesitated, standing near the door like wayward schoolchildren waiting for the principal. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the two chairs opposite me. They sat. Keisha's dress rustled loudly, a sad sound of ruined silk scraping against leather. She pulled the stained fabric around her, trying to hide the red wine splotch that marked her shame. My mother sat stiffly, her hands clutching her purse in her lap, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere over my left shoulder, unable to meet my gaze. I reached into my briefcase, which my assistant had placed on the side table earlier. I pulled out a heavy stack of documents. It was a thick pile bound with a black clip, the edges crisp and sharp. I held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it in my hands. This was not just paper. This was leverage. This was consequences. This was the end of their illusions. I let the stack drop onto the center of the table. The sound was heavy and dull, a flat thud that seemed to echo in the quiet room. It sounded like a gavel. It sounded like a coffin lid closing. My mother flinched. Keisha stared at the papers, her eyes widening as she recognized the legal letterhead on the top page. "We are done with the show," I said, my voice low and devoid of emotion. "The guests are gone. The cameras are off. The senator is halfway to the state capitol by now. There is no one left to impress Eleanor. There is no one left to lie to Keisha. It is just us. And the truth." I placed my hand on the stack of papers, pressing down firmly. "You wanted a lifestyle you could not afford. You wanted a status you did not earn. And you were willing to kill my father to get it. You thought you could use me as a stepping stone. You thought you could erase me when I was inconvenient and summon me when you needed cash. You made a gamble, and you lost." I slid the papers across the polished wood until they rested directly in front of my mother. "Read it," I said. "And do not skip the fine print, because your life depends on it." Eleanor picked up the top document with hands that shook so violently the paper rattled against the mahogany table. She squinted at the text, her eyes darting back and forth, trying to make sense of the legalese. I watched her struggle. I watched her denial fight against the black and white reality printed on the page. It was a title deed transfer. A document she should have recognized because she had signed the original 30 years ago. But this one was different. This one had a date stamp from 3 months ago, and a stamp that read, "Foreclosure auction finalized." "What is this?" she whispered, the paper slipping from her numb fingers. "This says the house on Oak Street was sold. That is impossible. That is my house. Your father pays the mortgage every month. We have lived there for 30 years. You cannot just print out fake papers, Nia. This is a sick joke even for you." "It is not a joke, Mother," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And Dad has not paid the mortgage in 18 months. He could not. Because every cent of his pension and every dollar of equity he pulled out of that house went to her. I pointed a finger at Keisha. She shrank back in her chair, pulling the ruined wedding dress tighter around her shoulders, as if it could protect her from the truth. She knew. Of course she knew. She was the black hole that had swallowed their retirement. Tell her, Keisha, I commanded. Tell her about the second mortgage Dad took out to pay off your credit cards from college. Tell her about the home equity line of credit he opened to pay for your failed boutique. Tell her about the bail money. Tell her about the settlement for the car accident you caused while texting. Tell her how you bled him dry until the bank sent the notice of default. Keisha looked down at the table, refusing to meet her mother's horrified gaze. I didn't mean to, she mumbled. I was going to pay it back. Once Marcus and I were married. Once I was rich. But you are not rich, I cut in. You are broke. And because of you, Dad stopped opening the mail 6 months ago. He hid the foreclosure notices in the garage because he was too ashamed to tell you that he had lost the only thing he had left. The house went to auction 90 days ago, Mother. It was a distressed asset sale. The bank just wanted to recoup their losses. They did not care about your memories or your status. They just wanted the cash. Eleanor looked like she had been struck physically. She turned to Keisha, her face a mask of betrayal. You told me the business was doing well. You told me Dad was just being stingy. You let me buy new furniture for a house we did not even own. We do not own it, I corrected. But someone does. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, interlacing my fingers. The bank sold the property to a private investment firm, a holding company that specializes in acquiring distressed residential assets. NJ Holdings, LLC. I waited for the penny to drop. It took a moment. Eleanor mouthed the name. NJ Holdings, N.J. Nia Jenkins. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. You, she breathed. Yes, Mother. Me. I bought the debt. I paid the arrears. I paid the penalties. And I bought the deed. I own the house you sleep in. I own the kitchen where you cook. I own the living room where you told your friends I was a failure. I am your landlord. And you have been living there rent-free for 3 months because I allowed it. I kept the roof over your head while you were planning a wedding to humiliate me. I paid the electricity bill so you could see to put on your makeup and look down on me. I own everything you thought was yours, and just like that resort gate outside, I hold the keys. Eleanor stared at me, the arrogance that had defined her for decades completely evaporated. She was no longer the matriarch. She was a tenant facing eviction. She looked at the deed, then at Keisha, and finally at me, her eyes pleading for a mercy she had never shown. Nia, she whispered, her voice trembling. You cannot be serious. That is our home. Where are we supposed to go? That is entirely up to you, I replied, my voice devoid of sympathy. You have 2 options, Mother. Option 1 is eviction. I can file the paperwork tomorrow morning. Given that you are squatting on private property and have caused significant financial damage to the previous owner, the court will grant an expedited order. You will have 48 hours to vacate the premises. You can pack whatever fits in your car and figure it out. There are shelters downtown, or maybe one of your church friends will take you in once they hear the full story. Keisha let out a small whimper, pulling her knees up to her chest. I cannot be homeless, she cried. I am a brand ambassador. I have an image. Then you better listen to option 2. I cut in sharp and cold. Option 2 is you stay. But the free ride is over. Effective immediately, the rent for the property on Oak Street is $3,000 a month. That is the fair market value for a 4-bedroom home in that zip code, plus utilities, plus insurance. And it is due on the 1st of every month. No grace periods. No excuses. $3,000. Eleanor gasped. Where am I supposed to get that kind of money? Your father cannot work. His pension is gone. Then you work, I said simply. Or Keisha works. She is young, she is healthy, she has 2 hands and a heartbeat. She can get a job, not a brand ambassador gig, not an influencer sponsorship. a real job, waitressing, retail, cleaning houses. I heard the Waffle House on Main Street is hiring for the night shift. It is honest work, Mother. The kind of work you used to do before you decided you were too good for it. The kind of work you mocked me for doing when I was trying to save myself. Keisha looked horrified. I cannot work at a Waffle House, she spat. It is beneath me. Nothing is beneath you when you are broke, Keisha, I shot back. You stole from your father. You lied to your fiancé. You tried to destroy your sister. You are at rock bottom. The only way up is to work for it. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. And one more thing. I am cutting off all financial aid. No more emergency transfers. No more paying off credit cards. No more bailouts. If the lights get cut off, you sit in the dark. If the fridge is empty, you go hungry. If you get sick, you go to the free clinic. You are on your own. Sink or swim. Eleanor looked at me with a mixture of hatred and awe. You are cruel, she whispered. You are enjoying this. I am not enjoying it, Mother, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. I am ending it. I am ending the cycle of dependency and abuse. I am forcing you to be adults. You wanted independence from me. You wanted me out of your life. Well, now you have it. You are independent. You are free to fail or succeed on your own merits. So what is it going to be? The shelter or the job application? Choose wisely, because unlike you, I keep my promises. The pen lay on the polished mahogany table between us, gleaming under the recessed lighting. It was a Mont Blanc, a heavy, expensive instrument that felt substantial in the hand. I had used it to sign multi-million-dollar deals, to acquire properties, and to build my empire. Now it would be used to sign the surrender of the women who had tormented me for decades. Eleanor looked at the pen, then at the contract, and finally at me. The fight had drained out of her, leaving behind a hollow shell of the woman who had terrorized waiters and belittled her children. She realized with a terrifying clarity that her charm, her tears, and her guilt trips had no currency here. She was facing a transaction she could not manipulate. There is one more clause, I said, pointing to the bottom of the second page. Clause 14, Section B. Read it carefully. Eleanor squinted, her eyes red and swollen. It says we are prohibited from contacting Joe Jenkins for any financial matters or medical decisions. It grants you sole power of attorney over his assets and care. It says we cannot visit him without your express written permission. That is correct, I said. You forfeited your right to be his wife when you risked his life for a party. You forfeited your right to his money when you stole it. From this moment on, he is under my protection. If you try to call him to beg for money, if you try to guilt him into signing over his pension, I will evict you immediately. Do you understand? She nodded, a jerky, broken movement. She understood. She was trading her husband for a roof over her head. It was a transaction she was willing to make because at her core, self-preservation was the only instinct she had left. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so badly the tip scratched against the paper, leaving a jagged line of ink. She signed her name, Eleanor Jenkins. It looked less like a signature and more like a scar. She pushed the paper toward Keisha. Sign it, Keisha, she whispered, her voice dead. Keisha stared at the document as if it were a death warrant. In a way, it was. It was the death of the socialite, the death of the influencer, the death of the girl who thought the world owed her a living. I cannot do this, she sobbed. I cannot work at a diner, Nia. Please, I am not built for that. You will be surprised what you are built for when you are hungry, I replied, cold and unmoved. Sign the paper, Keisha, or get out. The shelter closes its intake at 8. You have about an hour to get there if you start walking now. Keisha let out a sound of pure misery, a whine that belonged to a child, not a grown woman. She grabbed the pen, clutching it like a dagger. She signed with aggressive, angry strokes, tearing the paper slightly. She threw the pen down her chest, heaving. Are you happy now? She spat. You have humiliated us. You have taken everything. You have won. I picked up the documents, checking the signatures to ensure they were valid. I slid them into my briefcase and snapped the locks shut. The sound was final, absolute. I am not happy, Keisha, I said, standing up. I am relieved. I am relieved that my father is safe. I am relieved that I no longer have to pretend to respect people who despise me. And I am relieved that for the first time in your life, you are going to learn what the word consequences means. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. Rent is due on the 1st. Do not make me come collect it. I have a very aggressive legal team, and they get paid a lot of money to handle delinquent tenants. I walked out, leaving them sitting in the silence of the VIP room, two women in ruined, expensive dresses who had just signed away their pride to save their skins. They were safe from the streets for now, but they were prisoners of their own choices. And I held the keys. 3 months is a long time when you are living on the edge of survival. It is enough time to break a habit. It is enough time to lose a reputation. And as my sister Keisha was finding out, it is enough time to ruin a manicure that you can no longer afford to fix. The diner was loud and smelled of grease and stale coffee. It was a far cry from the Emerald Estate. Keisha stood near table 4, wiping her hands on a stained apricot-colored apron that fit poorly over her uniform. Her hair, which had been styled in a complex updo for her wedding day, was now pulled back in a messy, frizzing ponytail. She looked exhausted. The circles under her eyes were dark and deep shadows that no amount of drugstore concealer could hide. "Hey, honey, where is my refill?" a man shouted from the corner booth. He was heavy-set and rude, snapping his fingers at her like she was a dog. "I am coming, sir," Keisha mumbled, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge of entitlement. She grabbed the coffee pot, her hands shaking slightly. She rushed toward the table, trying to be efficient, trying to be invisible, but she moved too fast. Her hip checked the edge of the booth and the pot tipped. Hot coffee sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the table and dripping onto the man's jeans. "Are you stupid?" he yelled, jumping up and brushing at his pants. "Look what you did, you ruined my pants. Is this your first day, or are you just incompetent?" "I am so sorry," Keisha stammered, grabbing a rag to blot the mess. "I did not mean to. It was an accident." "Get away from me," the man snapped, pushing her hand away. "Go get your manager. I want this meal comped, and do not expect a tip." Keisha stood there frozen, the rag dripping coffee onto her worn sneakers. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She could not afford to cry. If she cried, she might get fired, and if she got fired, she would miss rent. She bit her lip, lowered her head, and walked to the kitchen to fetch the manager. She was learning the hard lesson that the world does not care about your potential or your beauty when you mess up their order. She was serving the public now, the same public she had once looked down upon, and the irony was a bitter pill she had to swallow every single shift. Across town, the reality for my mother was equally stark. The bus stop was exposed to the wind which whipped through the thin coat Eleanor was wearing. She stood at the curb, clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes darting nervously around the street. The luxury SUV was gone, repossessed weeks ago, to pay off a fraction of the outstanding legal fees. Now she relied on the city transit system, a service she had once campaigned to have rerouted away from her neighborhood because she thought it brought in the wrong element. The bus screeched to a halt, the doors hissing open. Eleanor stepped up, fumbling with her coin purse. Her hands, which used to flash with diamonds, were bare and chapped. She dug through the change, counting out quarters and dimes. "Move it, lady," the driver grunted, impatient. "People have places to be." "I am looking for it." Eleanor snapped automatically, trying to summon her old authority, but it fell flat. She was just another passenger holding up the line. She found the last nickel and dropped it into the machine, the sound tinny and cheap. She shuffled down the aisle, avoiding eye contact with the tired workers and students filling the seats. She found a spot near the back and sat down, pulling her coat tight. She stared out the dirty window, watching the city roll by, a city she used to think she owned. Now she was just a passenger in it, moving along a route she did not choose toward a destination she never wanted. She was paying her fare one coin at a time. The Atlantic breeze felt different here. It did not carry the weight of expectation or the stench of old debts. It smelled of salt and freedom. I stood on the travertine balcony of my private villa holding a cup of herbal tea that cost more than my mother's bus fare. Below me, the turquoise water stretched out to the horizon, a vast expanse of blue that seemed to wash away the memory of the last few months. But the most beautiful sight was not the ocean. It was the man standing at the edge of the private pier. My father Joe was unrecognizable from the gray, gasping ghost I had wheeled out of the ballroom 3 months ago. His skin had regained a rich, healthy hue glowing under the Florida sun. He had gained 15 pounds thanks to the private chef who ensured he ate 3 heart-healthy meals a day. The hollows in his cheeks were filled. The fear in his eyes was gone, replaced by a sparkle I had not seen since I was a child. He was wearing a crisp white linen shirt and shorts, looking like a man who had retired in style, not a man who had been bled dry by his family. He cast his line into the water with a smooth, practiced motion, his new fishing gear gleaming in the sunlight. I walked down the wooden steps, the sand warm beneath my feet. I did not want to interrupt him, but I needed to be close to him to reassure myself that he was really here, really safe. He heard my approach and turned his smile wide and genuine. "Hey there, superstar," he called out, his voice strong and clear. "The fish are biting today. I think we are going to have snapper for dinner." I leaned against the railing beside him, watching the line bob in the gentle surf. "You look happy, Dad. You look like yourself again." "I am happy, Nia," he replied, setting the rod down in its holder so he could face me. "I wake up in the morning and my chest does not hurt. I take my pills and the bottle is full. I eat breakfast and no one asks me for a credit card. It is the first time in 30 years I have been able to just breathe." He looked out at the water, his expression turning thoughtful but not sad. "I used to think I stayed for you girls. I thought I was keeping the family together by letting Eleanor have her way, but looking back I think I was just afraid. Afraid of her anger, afraid of the shame. But this," he gestured to the villa, the ocean and me, "this is not shame. This is peace, and I would not trade it for all the country clubs in Atlanta." He reached out and squeezed my hand, his grip firm and steady. "Thank you for saving me, Nia. Not just from the heart attack, but from the life that was killing me." I squeezed back, tears pricking my eyes. "You saved me first, Dad. You were the only one who ever saw me. Now we just get to see the world together." He picked up his rod again, casting the line back into the surf with a laugh. We were safe here. The fortress was secure, and the toxic cloud that had hovered over our lives for so long had finally dissipated in the ocean breeze, leaving nothing but blue skies ahead. The phone buzzed against the glass surface of my mahogany desk, creating a sharp vibration that cut through the quiet hum of the ocean breeze drifting in from the balcony. It was a New York number. A year ago, seeing an unknown number would have spiked my anxiety, making me wonder if it was a creditor looking for my mother, or perhaps a hospital calling about my father. Now it just meant business. I swiped to answer, my voice calm and authoritative, the voice of a woman who owed nothing to anyone. "This is Nia Jenkins," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "Ms. Jenkins, this is Sarah Sterling. I am the senior editor at Forbes magazine." I paused, my hand freezing over the keyboard. Forbes. The publication that sat on the coffee tables of the very people who had looked down on me at the wedding. The magazine my mother used to buy just to look at the pictures of the life she desperately wanted, but could never afford. "I am listening," I said, keeping my tone neutral, though my heart gave a single excited thump. "We have been tracking your acquisitions over the last 18 months. Sarah continued, her voice crisp and professional. "The turnaround of the Emerald Estate was impressive, but your recent purchase of the downtown commercial block has really shaken up the Atlanta market. You are moving with a speed and precision we rarely see. But what really caught our attention was the story behind the assets." She paused for effect, letting the silence hang for a moment. "We know about the family history, Ms. Jenkins. We know about the struggle, the estrangement, and the sheer grit it took to build your portfolio from nothing. We are planning our upcoming issue on self-made women who defied the odds. We do not just want to feature you. We want you on the cover." I stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the private beach. The water was a brilliant turquoise, the sand white and pristine. It was a long way from the cramped apartment where I used to count pennies for bus fare. The working title for the piece is "The Real Estate Queen Who Rose from Rejection," Sarah added. "We want to tell the whole story. How you turned being the black sheep into being the bank. How you used the doubt of others as fuel. It is a story of resilience, Nia, and we think it will inspire millions." I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw the woman I had become. The blazer was no longer cheap. The eyes were no longer pleading for acceptance. They were sharp, clear, and unafraid. My mother had spent her life trying to curate a false image of perfection to get into these circles. She had lied, cheated, and stolen to be adjacent to power. And here I was, being invited to the center of it simply by being myself, simply by working hard and refusing to let their rejection define me. I thought about Keisha serving coffee. I thought about my mother counting change for the bus. And then I thought about the thousands of other women who were currently being told they were not enough, who were being hidden away by families who did not value them. "I will do it," I told Sarah, my voice ringing with finality. "But I want control over the narrative, no glossing over the ugly parts. If we are going to tell the story of how I rose, we have to be honest about what I rose from." "Agreed," Sarah said, her voice bright with excitement. "We will send a team down next week." I hung up the phone and looked out at the horizon. The sun was hitting the water, creating a path of shimmering gold that seemed to lead straight to the future. I had not just survived my family, I had surpassed them. And now the whole world was going to know that the uninvited landlady was actually the queen of the castle. The sun was dipping low over the Florida coastline, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. I sat in my parked Bentley, the engine purring softly, a beast ready to run. My phone sat on the passenger seat, vibrating with a persistence that was almost impressive. The caller ID flashed a single word: "Mother." It was the 12th time she had called today. I knew why. Today was the first of the month. Rent was due, and knowing Eleanor, she was short. I picked up the phone, staring at the screen. I could picture her perfectly sitting in that cramped apartment, probably wearing her last decent silk blouse, trying to summon the authority she no longer possessed. She would be crying. She would be begging. She would be telling me about her high blood pressure, about how hard it was to take the bus, about how Keisha's tips were not enough to cover the electric bill. She would try to guilt me into sending just a little something, just enough to tide them over, just enough to let her pretend for one more month that she was not reaping exactly what she had sown. For years, that guilt had been my cage. It had kept me tethered to her need for validation, kept me striving to be good enough to be seen. But looking at her name now, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no obligation, just a quiet finality. I swiped the screen, but not to answer. I navigated to the contact settings. My thumb hovered over the block contact button for a fraction of a second, a final heartbeat of hesitation before the old Nia, the dutiful daughter, whispered one last plea for reconciliation. But then I looked up. I saw my father walking along the beach, his silhouette framed against the setting sun, his laughter carrying on the breeze as he reeled in a catch. I saw the peace in his posture, the freedom in his movements, and I knew that reconciliation with Eleanor meant sacrificing that peace. It meant inviting the poison back in. I pressed block. The phone went silent. The vibration stopped. The connection was severed not just digitally, but spiritually. I deleted the voicemail she had left earlier without listening to it. I did not need to hear her voice to know what she said. I knew her script by heart, but I had written a new one. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the driveway, the gravel crunching satisfyingly under the tires. I turned onto the coastal highway, the ocean stretching out endlessly to my left, a vast open horizon that promised infinite possibility. The wind rushed through the open windows, tangling my hair, carrying the scent of salt and victory. I wasn't driving away from something anymore. I was driving toward everything. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, watching my villa disappear into the distance, but I was not looking back at the past. I was looking at the woman reflected in the glass. She was smiling, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. They say the best revenge is living well. But that is too simple. The best revenge is not caring if they see you live well. It is building a life so full, so complete, so authentically yours, that their absence is not a hole, but a wholeness. It is realizing that you never needed their permission to be great. You only needed to give it to yourself. I pressed the accelerator, the car surging forward into the golden light. I was Nia Jenkins. I was the owner. I was the savior. And for the first time in my life, I was free. The road ahead was clear, and I was finally in the driver's seat. The sun set behind me, casting long shadows that could no longer touch me, and I drove on into a future that belonged entirely to me. Nia's journey teaches a profound truth. Your value is never determined by those who fail to see it, even if they share your blood. Rejection can be a powerful redirection toward your true purpose. Instead of exhausting herself seeking validation from a toxic source, Nia invested in herself, turning her pain into power and her exclusion into an empire. Her story proves that true freedom isn't just financial, it is emotional. It is the peace found in setting firm boundaries and realizing that you do not need an invitation to the table when you own the building. If this story inspired you to claim your own power and build your own legacy, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of resilience and triumph.